Good day and welcome to our conversation today in observance of International Day for People of African Descent, which is observed on August 31st every year for the last 9 years, when it was first designated in 2015 and is due to expire in 2024. Our discussion today is by way of a conversation that we hope you will follow for the next 90 minutes. And during that conversation, we will be sharing with you videos and background to today. We will be conversing with our discussants, who I will introduce in a short moment. But to put today's program in context, like I said, it's International Day for People of African Descent, and the United Nations, in order to advance the work of that objective to bring recognition to people of African descent the world over, also appointed a United Nations Forum for people of African descent. And one of our presenters and discussants today will be none other than Honorable Ambassador Dr. June Suma, who is one of 2 CARICOM representatives on the United Nations Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. And she will be joining us online to share with us her views, the latest updates, the context of a current call for a second decade, and she will also comment on other related issues, because today's discussion is also coming against the background of St. Lucia having observed the Laos Festival officially yesterday, the 30th of August every year. Today, the 31st, is International Day for People of African Descent, and 7 days from now will be on September 7th, the United Nations CARICOM Day, which will be observed for the second time since the first summit of African Union and Caribbean leaders took place in September of 2021. So, without further ado, let me put today's into further context. One logo has been presented by the United Nations and approved, which we want to share you. Anyway, you see that logo, it is the United Nations logo for International Day for People of African Descent, which we will be displaying during this discussion. The logo is in black and white, circular. It is very imaginary from the standpoint that it reflects the inputs of people of African descent around the world. And when we say people of African descent around the world, we mean that people of African descent in all of the countries and territories, including non-independent territories, where people of African descent reside. And that is across the world. And beyond Africa, it is called the 6th region of the African Union, what we tend to refer to as the Caribbean diaspora is part of that 6th region that includes not just Caribbean diaspora, but persons of African descent from the continent who are also living abroad. And that 6th region of the African Union has been represented and presented as something that we in CARICOM have to take clearly, and it is something that in the past year has seen CARICOM leaders agreed to a $1.5 billion agreement with the African Import-Export Bank to make that money available to countries to facilitate trade between Africa and the Caribbean. We also have seen and will continue to see the summit of African and Caribbean heads of government taking place on the 7th of September. And before that, the Cultural Development Foundation, the National Reparations Committee, and a number of entities have been working together to present the Black Hair Matters activity that is going to be taking place on the 3rd of September, this coming Sunday, which we will be telling you more about. And all of that because the theme of today's discussion seeks to join the fact that it is International Day for People of African Descent with the issue of Black Hair Matters. And why Black Hair Matters is because, unfortunately, 40, 50, and 60 years after independence in the Caribbean, persons with dreadlocks or Rastafarian hairstyle are being prevented once again from entering schools, as if your hair or your hairstyle has anything to do with your education. It is an issue which in the past year has revived in St. Lucia. It is also alive in Antigua and Barbuda. It raises its ugly head in public and private and religious schools across the region. The issue of braids, not locks but braids, is one that is also causing discrimination against people in different states. And as we speak right now, 20 US states have passed legislation, the last one being Texas, in April of this year, the 12th of April. And that legislation is aimed at outlawing discrimination against people because of their hair, and it has to do with braids, dreadlocks, and other forms of hairstyle mainly associated with people of African descent. So there are actual laws passed across the United States, and in our discussion today, the theme is why the call for a second decade and why black hair matters to people of African descent. And like I said, we will be discussing this by way of a conversation with our guests. But before we introduce our guests, let's put today's occasion in perspective. And we are now going to join the Executive Director of the United Nations Fund for Population Activities, UNFPA. Her name is Dr. Natalie Canem, and she will be sharing with us the facts about how and why people of African descent bring a special light to the world. Dr. Canem.
The world, with a rich culture and shared history, with strength, determination, and resilience, with fearless calls for equality and justice. They light the world despite the legacy of enslavement, racism, and underdevelopment. For women of African descent, there is a double burden. However, injustice and inequality is not fate, not set in stone. People of African descent are rising up against injustice and calling everyone to end hatred and division, which diminish all of us in the end. We can only face such challenges once we band together. And on this International Day for People of African Descent, let us agree to make racism history, to come together with one heart, and to leave no one behind. The just and inclusive future we dream of depends on it.
Canem, Executive Director of the UNFPA. And like I said, today we're having a conversation, and I'm going to now introduce our three conversationalists, for lack of a more descriptive word, and to share with us I'll be introducing them, and then we're going to go to a slightly longer video that will put the other half of our theme into consideration. Dr. Canem has just explained why we are observing International Day for People of African Descent, the August 31st every year, and we are going to hear after that from someone of Caribbean descent who has taken the time off to give us a brief history of why the afro hairstyle is not for everyone. But to introduce our conversationalist today, we will be joined by Honorable Ambassador Dr. June Suma. Like I said, she's the one of two CARICOM representatives on the United Nations Forum for People of African Descent. And in studio with us are Senator Alison Jean. Senator Jean is a legislator with much experience in paying attention to the issues that we will be discussing, and that historical attention was fortified by her own family experiences, which we will get into when we start the conversation. But for those of you who will remember the name, Senator Alison Jean is the mother of the Black Lives Matter martyr, Botham Jean, who was slain in the United States. And she will be able to share with us not only the impact of black lives and the importance of black hair in the United States, but even share some of her own experiences that we grew up with in St. Lucia, insofar as how hair was regarded and treated insofar as the society was concerned. Our other in-house conversationalist today is none other than Nkrumah Lucia, history lecturer at St. Mary's College. He's also a founding member of the National Reparations Committee, and he has had responsibility for the past 10 years. We will be 10 years old in November, but he has always had responsibility for youth and students, taking the issue of reparations to youth and students, and he's been doing it not only at school but also at work and for the association on behalf of himself and other lecturers in history. He'll be sharing that experience with you, and I can share with you, as you will see, and those of you who will have known him 9 years ago will see that the effect of the work of taking reparations to youth and students has started telling on his beard. So folks, these are our two in-house guests, and now we will go to a video that is going to put the issue of black hair matters into perspective on International Day for People of African Descent. And that video was done in 2021. It's by something called, you'll see it on the screen, JZ Traits, and it is part of a series And if you get in touch with us through the National Reparations Committee or the National Emancipation Committee, which is being taken care of by the Cultural Development Foundation, we will be able to share that video with you. And to remind you that all that is coming to you today is coming in observance of International Day for People of African Descent, sponsored by the Cultural Development Foundation, the National Reparations Committee, Events St. Lucia, and the various entities we will be mentioning later on the show. So we go now to our video on why the Afro is not for everyone.
The Afro has a luxurious cultural and aesthetic history. Oftentimes seen as divine, Afro-textured hair need not do much to achieve this style. In fact, it is literally its embodiment. Because this hair texture has helix formation that allows it to defy gravity growing towards the sun, unmanipulated natural hair organically takes the shape of an afro. The afro, commonly known as the fro, refers to hair of tight curls that forms a full, evenly rounded shape on one's head. The afro is not your typical hairstyle, and to even think of it as simply a style is actually an acknowledgement to what it truly symbolizes. It represents a large spectrum of hair textures, people of diverse cultures rooted in similar history, freedom, a way of life, femininity, and masculinity, but somehow simultaneously makes a pretty bold political statement. And as usual, none of this is without controversies. Life in the Motherland, Pre-Slavery Era. Laurie Tarps, co-writer of the book Hair Story, posited that just about everything about a person's identity could be learned by looking at their hair. In early African civilizations, hairstyle indicated a person's family background, tribe, social status, geographic region, age, and spiritual convictions. One of the most popular references of the fro pre-slavery era is that of the nomads of East Africa. It is said that back in the day, the Somali nomads displayed a custom in which the young men wore their hair in enormous bushes, smoothed out with homemade butters. When the young man becomes older or got married, he would trim the fro somewhat, cease applying butters, and would wear the hair completely natural. Among many different tribes, there is also a cultural understanding that hair, given its close location to the skies, is a conduit for spiritual interaction with God. According to an article published in 2012 entitled Hairdressing in African Culture, the author highlighted that hairdressing in the motherland is always the work of trusted friends or relatives. In addition to the social amiable aspect of the events, it is believed that a hair in the hands of an enemy could become an ingredient in the production of a dangerous charm or medicine that could injure the owner. As a person who grew up in the Caribbean, being a part of the African diaspora, I could recall observing the elders being very skeptical about hair not being disposed of correctly after grooming or braiding. This belief could possibly be the reason for the oral tradition and practice, but that we may never truly know. Anthropologist Sylvia Bone stated that West African communities admired a head full of long, thick hair on a woman. It is believed that this demonstrates the life forces, the multiplying power of profusion, prosperity, a green thumb for bountiful farms, and many healthy children. Another culture that has strong historic ties to the fro is that of the Fijians. It is recorded that people of this culture had a distinctive hairstyle, which was described as a bushy hairstyle that you trim like a hedge. An article published in 1970 by the New York Times documenting Fijian history stated that this hairstyle was traditionally worn universally by both sexes, but this has since changed and now primarily adorns the head of nearly all females. A native stated that achieving a proper puffiness takes careful preparation of the hair with a solution of lime and clay. She also stated that her ancestors utilized wooden combs and for sleeping, a neck supporting rack to maintain the hair overnight. What is very evident is that during this era, the afro was worn with great intention, conviction, and pride. Slavery and the colonization era. The transatlantic slave trade shipped millions from the continent. Following that, the scramble for Africa occurred, leaving the continent colonized. These two significant events within our history caused an astronomical shift in how we perceived ourselves. Our systems of life assimilated by force into that of another man's. What was seen as beautiful was shamed and had to be hidden in order to preserve one's life. The intricate details paid to hair, such as having access and utilizing herbs, oils, hair butters, and other hair care products, were non-existent. As such, our ancestors resorted to bacon grease, butter, and kerosene as their moisturizers, conditioners, and shampoos. Out of desperation, they used sheep fleece carding tools to aid in detangling their hair. For almost 400 years, Africans were subjected to abhorrent, dehumanizing conditions, and its effects on every aspect of our lives is still evident today. Many of the horrors experienced are unimaginable, and a lot of the history during this time is still being revealed today. For the parts that were documented, such as shaving of the head and laws prohibiting black women from wearing their hair in public, is not even the tip of the iceberg. Post-slavery, post-colonization era. Afros have frequently been categorized as unprofessional or inappropriate. Susanna Walker, in her book Style and Status, relays the story of Annabel Baker, who in 1943 was told by the dean of the institute that it was disrespectful for her to wear an afro while representing the school at a conference, and that she should be ashamed to wear her hair in its natural state. The pressure for black people to tame their hair existed for both men as it did for women. It was popular at this time to chemically process the hair or to use pressing combs to get rid of the kinks, curls, and coils. The afro has its most popular phase in the 60s, but this hairstyle emerged prior. In fact, it is said that a small group of young black female dancers and jazz singers wore unstraightened hair. At this time, the hairstyle they wore had no name, and when noticed by the press, was commonly referred to as wearing their hair close cropped. Wearing their hair unstraightened expressed their feeling of racial pride. Maxine Craig stated in an article titled The History of Black Hair that around the mid-1960s, similarly motivated students who were civil rights activists at Howard and other historically black colleges stopped straightening their hair, had it short, and allowed it to grow without the use of chemicals. Over time, this close cropped style developed into a large rounded shape worn by both sexes. It created a sense of commonality among its wearers who saw this style as a mark of a person who was willing to take a defiant stand against racial injustices. In the late 1960s, the Black is Beautiful movement, the first of its kind, was recorded. This was a call to end the need to culturally assimilate into white society. This movement, along with the civil rights movement, resulted in a literal reconnection with our hair roots, and the afro represented this shift and embodiment. As the fro increased in popularity, its association with the black political movement weakened, and so its capacity to communicate the political commitment declined. With the commercialization of the afro, It was seen represented on black hair care products, magazines, book covers, and on television. Through the afro, the general public grew accustomed to seeing the texture of unstraightened hair as beautiful, and the way was open for the proliferation of unstraightened styles for African Americans and Africans within the diaspora. Today, as we contribute to history, let's be sure to wear our afro with intention, pride, conviction, and confidence, knowing just a little glimpse of its history. If you have made it thus far, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video.
Thank you for watching, folks, and of course it took a little time, but it has certainly put into context why we have attached that sub-theme to the observance of the International Day. Now, like I said earlier, the International Decade was established in 2015 so that the United Nations would pay attention to its member countries, over 190 member states, paying attention to the importance of observing the rights and everything that goes with the existence of people of African descent in all parts of the world outside of Africa. And over the last 9 years, unfortunately, because the United Nations did not put sufficient funds into that decade, today in the 9th year, the Permanent Forum, of which Dr. Suma will tell us about a little later, has found and agreed on behalf of governments, non-government entities, civil society, and advocate groups around the world, over 500 of which met in Geneva in Switzerland last December, at which they issued a call for a second decade, because the decade is ending next year, 2024, and if anything much has been achieved, only except that the issue, the day has been observed every day since then, but nothing has come out of it. And yesterday, a group of experts at the United Nations on the 30th of August called on the United Nations General Assembly this year, which is coming up in a few weeks, to give more attention to and to pass a resolution for a second decade. And briefly, this is what they said. On the occasion of International Day for People of African Descent, a group of UN experts issued the following joint statement, and I quote: "The International Day for People of African Descent is a day to acknowledge and remember the historic and ongoing triumphs as well as struggles of people of African descent to realize their human rights. Today, more than ever, the world urgently needs humanity to unite and collaborate with unwavering commitment in a spirit of equality and non-discrimination. This demands a political will to eliminate all forms of racial discrimination, inequality, and stratification at both the domestic and international levels. To achieve this goal, the UN experts say, inequities within and among countries will need to be drastically decreased, and the legacies of colonialism, apartheid, enslavement, and genocide effectively resolved. The cause of people of African descent for recognition, justice, and development is a cause for humanity. The International Decade for People of African Descent, 2015 to 2024, together with the International Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination and the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, have all contributed significantly to combating racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. However, there is much work to be done, and the momentum gained must be sustained. Therefore, we, the UN experts, urge the United Nations General Assembly to consider the proclamation of the Second International Decade for People of African Descent for the period 2025 to 2034 with a view to taking further action to address systematic discrimination and legacies of the past to bring about the full recognition, justice, and development for people of African descent worldwide. End of quote. And that was a statement issued yesterday for circulation today, which we have shared with you. Do we have Dr. Suma online as yet? If not, then we will continue we will start our conversation. Like we said earlier, we have Senator Alison Jean, who is here with us, and we have Mr. Nkrumah Lucian, historian and lecturer. Let's start with Mr. Lucian. The NRC and the various entities have all taken heed of the call by the United Nations for the observance of International Day for People of African Descent today, and now there's a call for a second decade. Give us your, how do you really feel that, where do you see the Caribbean falling into that? Do you support the call for a second decade, and do you think we should, is something that we really should be taking on?
Okay, yeah, we live in the Caribbean where the majority population is African. So almost any issue that you may be discussing in the Caribbean, where it comes from crime, from developing our human potential, it would be linked with that. And we are aware that there are so many unaddressed issues where people of African descent are concerned. Then, yeah, so it definitely justifies another decade, and I would say more broadly, a general continuous attention being given to those issues. So it's definitely welcome that the UN will do it in the form of an additional decade, but it stands to reason that it's something that we need to be doing for some time to come.
Mm-hmm. And I can say that the chairman of CARICOM at the moment, Dominica Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit, he did announce a couple of days ago that CARICOM is seeking to support as a unit at the UN General Assembly not only the CARICOM member states, but other non-CARICOM member states washed by the Caribbean Sea that belong to the Association of Caribbean States, including the non-English speaking Caribbean countries from Nicaragua to Panama, all the way through. And between now and the General Assembly, between September and October, it is expected that the group of African and Latin American and Caribbean states at the United Nations will come together and hopefully be able to get the General Assembly to agree this year in 2023 that they would take 1 year in 2024 to prepare for the second decade from 2024 to 2039, and hopefully, folks, they will be putting some funding to it, putting the money of the world where the mouth of the United Nations is. And it is along those lines that Caribbean countries will also be expected to participate. And Senator Jean, you're a legislator, first of all. You're also a mother, and we will be speaking to you in both of these respects today. First, as a legislator, you belong to the upper house, and that is where laws, folks, the reason why it's called the upper house is because where the laws are introduced and passed in the lower house, what we call the House of Assembly, until those laws go upstairs to the upper house, which is the Senate, and until and unless those laws are approved by the Senate, then it cannot become a law. Up until then, it is a bill or an act. But to be made into law, it has to be approved by the Senate. And I go to make that distinction, Senator Jean, from the standpoint that, like I said earlier, 20 states across the United States of America have to date enacted legislation outlawing discrimination based on hair. And the other context in which you will be with us, or in which you are with us, is that you are the mother of Botham Jean, St. Lucian, a student and a young employee in the United States who was unfortunately among the many people shot and killed because they were black, leading to the creation of the Black Lives Movement that kicked off with the killing of George Floyd on the 23rd of May 2020. I remember that day because that's the day I had my accident and broke my leg in 4 places, and therefore I remember the date. But the case involving Botham Jean drew global attention, it drew Caribbean attention, it drew St. Lucian attention, and Senator Jean, share with us your own perspectives growing up in a St. Lucia where hair was discriminated against, because we have young people, the people who Nkrumah is teaching at school, the students and young people who will not imagine that there was once upon a time when your hair mattered insofar as access to the society. And not many will also know that 40 years ago, when the Rastafari movement was taking root in St. Lucia, the issue of young Rastafari students being able to attend primary school and secondary school was an issue where principals took it upon their own to decide whether or not to allow children with dreadlocks to come to school. And soon after independence, when the issue became really a national issue, the then Minister of Education, Louis George, passed a declaration. He issued a letter to all principals of all schools in St. Lucia saying that they have to allow the children of Rastafarians to enter school once they cover their hair. And to our surprise, those of us who were there back then, to find now that the issue of whether students can go to school with their locks or their hairstyle is again an issue. And like with the case of the pitons and the recent judge's ruling, it is important that we understand that politicians and governments and ministers can make statements, but it doesn't necessarily become law. So that where guidelines might be issued, it is always important to make those guidelines into formal regulations that have to be followed. So let's go to Senator Jean. You'll share with us your perspectives on the 2 issues, the International Day and why black hair matters from your own standpoint.
Yeah, well, growing up as a young black lady, girl in the community, there was a distinction of hair. There was nice hair and there was hard hair. And you grew up knowing that, and so you thought that the better hair was nice hair. And so black hair, you know, I remember for my first communion, one of the things that they did was to hot comb my hair so that you can make it nice for your first communion. So that sort of socialization is what we went through as young ladies. And then in applying for a job at a bank, one of the things that came up front in the rules was that you could not have braided hair. Your hair had to be permed. Well, if they said no braided hair, then they obviously were saying that you had to have your hair in some other way.
Nice.
It had to be nice. So it couldn't be hard, it had to be nice. And so I think that led to a sort of lower self-esteem based on the way that your hair was designed. I'm happy that I took a decision about 10 years ago to go natural. I stopped the perm, I stopped everything else to make my hair nice. And I can tell my friends that the only thing you need in order to rock your natural hair is confidence. Confidence that you are beautiful no matter how your hair is worn. So from my earlier socialization, it took me some time before I really grasped the awareness of my African descent and appreciated who I was no matter how I looked. So I think for the young ladies who are coming up, that's one of the things we need to do. And I'm a bit concerned that we're pushing the whole thing of Barbie and, you know, these sort of Caucasian looking dolls and so on.
Barbie's a hit movie now.
Yes, it's now a hit movie and everybody jumping into Barbie. In fact, yesterday when I watched the Lawas Festival, I was saying, why not have a Lawas themed party rather than borrowing from the international, the US, over this whole Barbie theme and so on. So when I wear pink or red, I should really be denoting Lawas, which is our indigenous festival. And it points us to our African descent, our own, you know, take something that is our own. So it's not only about black hair, but blackness. The rich heritage that we have ought to be presented in such a way that shows our appreciation of it. Now, going to my experience with both of them in the United States.
Before we go to that, I just wanted us to ask, Nkrumah, you've been teaching history for more than the past decade. How has that issue, how have you had to deal with that issue at the college, and what can you tell us about the response of today's teachers, who are certainly more conscious than back in 1979 and in the or supposed to be more conscious? How has the issue played out at school? We read about it, we hear it in the news, but give us your perspective.
Yeah, we generally try to connect, you know, the history with the present situation. So we do highlight those issues. How, for instance, the period of slavery and colonialism impacts people's impression of themselves, their skin color, the texture of their hair, and also the kind of ignorance that colonialism created in terms of people's understanding their differences. Because we have schools of persons of different hair textures. Why do we have the kind of hair that we have? That's an important thing for people to understand. And even the idea that it's difficult to comb. Africa has the longest, you could say the longest legacy of of grooming of the hair. You know, from the combs, the video you showed earlier, also looked at the hair care products that have been produced. So obviously under slavery period, you would not have access to those things, and it created a kind of amnesia. So we do deal with those things in the school. However, we do know that on a wider level within the society, we do have those biases where hair is concerned, and a lack of understanding of the significance of hair, the significance of different ways of styling the hair. And we still have a pending issue throughout our society, in the workplaces, etc., of understanding, okay, what is appropriate, what is professional. These are things that still have not been ironed out as a society, and persons with African textured hair, particularly the tightly curled hair, end up being the main victims of that ignorance, that amnesia, that lack of, you know, a reasoned out standard in terms of how hair should be groomed.
But when we look at it, a follow-up question is, do the teachers and principals discuss the issue, like in your, you know, in your break time, or when you get together in the canteen? Do you meet formally, or is it just a policy that will be adopted by a principal? Or
the school does have a policy where hair is concerned.
Each school. Each school, or
each school has, yes, its own. Yes, we don't have a
uniform policy.
Uniform policy across the system. So even how things like plaited hair worn by males or locked, etc., is perceived, that is dealt with differently in different schools. As to discussing it, these discussions come up when there are contentions where the issue is concerned, which has happened a few times over the last few years, where particular parents may not want to conform to that particular or question the policy. So as I said, it remains an unresolved issue, you know, throughout the education system. And I'll also say in professional spheres as well. Some years ago, I haven't heard of it recently in St. Lucia, but I know some years ago in Trinidad and Tobago, there was that issue, a particular workplace where a young man was told that his hair was inappropriately groomed. You know, what is proper grooming, you know. Also recently, same in Trinidad as well, some students were barred from graduating or attending the graduation ceremony for the hair. So we know it's an issue that has not been resolved in the Caribbean, has not even been properly reasoned out. And as they come up, we need to see whether it is something that is going to be just dealt with, you know, with a band-aid, or whether we are really going to examine the issue to see what is behind that, and therefore what would be the most appropriate way of resolving it.
And in fact, as Senator Jean was saying earlier, we grew up where hair mattered in terms of the society, and as you was pointing out, the banks not only discriminated against your hair, but they also, without saying so, ensured that tellers were of a lighter complexion, as close to white and as far from black as possible at certain banks. And how did those issues inform and affect your ability to deal with the subsequent trauma that you had to deal with on getting the news on that unfortunate day that your son was shot dead eating ice cream and watching TV in his home by a cop who say she mistook the room?
Well, I can say that Botham was killed because he was black, and I could say that categorically because at the trial, the woman actually said she saw a silhouette. Now, sitting in the comfort of his living room and she walking in and violating his civil right and saying she saw a silhouette suggests that had his skin been lighter, he would have been bright enough for her to see. And so that for me says that he was shot in his own apartment because he was black. And if you follow several other incidents in the United States where black people are killed, there is always some excuse which suggests that they were running while black, walking while black, eating Skittles while black, lying in the comfort of their bedroom while black. There are no-knock warrants on people's houses, and police officers just go in and they shoot people in their bed while black. George Floyd while black. Breonna Taylor, and there's so many others. A young man is driving his car. He has a little scarf on his rearview mirror, and he is stopped and gunned down while black. So there are several incidents where black people are the targets, and it's only because of the color of their skin, the texture of their hair. And so while Bofum's case, I mean, is directly and personal to me, but I always think of it even beyond Botham and what we could do to ensure that we as black people survive in this world. Because the focus is on America, but there's racism all over, in Europe and in several other places, even right here in our own country. I think we have to have a greater awareness of our blackness, but do something about it. So from what Mr. Lucian is saying, every school has its own guideline on hair. I don't think that's good enough. I believe that our laws should be bold enough to say that there should be no discrimination, whether it be on hair, whether it be on color, whether it be on race, whether it be on whatever it is, so that you don't leave the rules to the whims and fancies of the principal of the day or the board of management of the day. It has to be enshrined within our laws. And if I recall, after the Louis George's guidelines or circular came about as a result of a legal challenge of some parents to that school, because their Rastafarian child was not permitted to attend school with his hair because of his locks. I think that case is still outstanding. The courts have not yet ruled on that case. That's years gone by.
Decades.
Decades. So when you have a decade for the recognition of people of African descent, and we're asking for a second decade, I believe it should not be a decade at a time. It should be something that we know should be passed by the United Nations, and our laws should then fit in to whatever conventions that come out of that recognition. Because when you talk about children coming in, I think it was last year or the year before, a child whose hair, afro, nicely groomed, but prevented from attending school because of the length of his hair. My goodness, why should we be paying attention to things that I consider so minuscule when there are bigger issues that we should be taking?
Length or style of hair has nothing to do with your education. Your ability to learn.
I would say it differently, Earl. I want to know from the educators whether they have seen any trends with the length of hair or the style of hair and the academic results. Okay? Or length of hair and behavior, style of hair and attitude, discipline, and all of these things. Is there a correlation between hair and these other factors? If that can be proven that there are negative results correlated with style of hair or something, style or length of hair, then I will accede. But if there isn't, what really is driving this whole rule of how hair should be worn? Right now we see so many professors in the academic field. In fact, I associate nerds with their hair in all kinds of places, what we thought was unkempt hair. But they're coming out from a lot of the professors in schools all over the world. So what really is the issue? I believe the focus ought to be, yes, on courtesy, on discipline, on etiquette, on you know, attitudes, on conflict resolution, on anti-bullying. That to me ought to be the issues. But if you're going to make the issue hair, then you're actually stimulating bullying, because you're going to have the children who are properly groomed then bully those who they believe are outside of the school rules and things like that. To me, black hair matters, but it also has to go with an all-rounded, comprehensive review of our blackness, of our Africanness, of who we are as a people, what we have achieved, and where we want to go.
And Kuma, does our curriculum allow for you or any teacher to be able to introduce these subjects and concepts in the way that Senator Jean has during your teaching without fear of violating a school policy? As you pointed out, each school would, and I'm not necessarily talking about the college.
Yeah, I speak generally. I mean, you have various subjects where the issue can be broached, whether it be history, whether it be social studies. I think even if you're looking at an issue like health and family life, these things can be dealt with. You know, you deal with the issue of norms, you deal with the issue of hygiene and all of those things. But I would go further to say that on a wider societal level, we have to deal with those things, because as Senator Jia pointed out, you can't even begin to discuss the correlation between this and that without recognizing, for instance, that for many years, persons would be barred from various spheres of society based on their hair. So you would have, for instance, you would find in certain areas, you would find people with hair groomed a particular way. And of course, if I am not allowed in that area, then I have the freedom now to wear my hair in certain ways. And you hear people now say that, okay, if somebody is wearing their hair in that way, they classify them, you know? So I heard a reference made some time back where parents who requested that their son be allowed to wear cornrows were informed that people who wear that hairstyle have an issue with authority. You see, so you don't get a chance to actually seriously examine that if you have those ingrained biases, you know, and then you can look at the impact that, for instance, these kind of views would have on a police officer dealing with somebody, even here, you know, or somebody just walking on the street and seeing you. You know, so
no, in fact, on the question of the police officer, the Texas law that I referred to that was passed on the 12th of April, it came as a result of, like Senator Jean was saying, a police officer had been prevented from carrying out his duty because he wore braids, not locks. His hair was braided, and he was suspended from duty until he cut it, so he took them to court. And in his evidence, he was saying that, listen, when they had this a big issue, a race issue, where there were riots and so on, he had to keep the peace and to arrest, and nobody came to tell him that because of his hair, he could not have done his work. Now, it took a year. We're still waiting for the one hair. It took a year before the case was called. And when the judge ruled that he had been discriminated against, then the law was introduced in the Senate and in the House. However, he pointed out that the damage had already been done.
Exactly.
And what was happening is that there are many other students now who, as a result of that precedent, they have lawyers. We stay here and we see it on TV where lawyers inviting you, if you have a case, call us. You know, if you're living in Flint and you drink water some time ago, call us. You might be sick. We still under the colonial thought that lawyers not supposed to advertise their services here. So you have a situation where there is open discrimination against students in St. Lucia and other countries because of their hair. There are cases that can be won, but you don't have the lawyers saying, come, let's do a pro bono thing, come, let's do a human rights something. So I think that is an issue that needs to be looked at, not only on the day-to-day, but between the days. And like Senator Jean said, we need to move from leaving that individual authority to a principal who will say, not in my school, as some would tend to do. Or churches, religious schools, I would say, not in our school, you know, or principals in government schools who say, not as long as I'm principal. So to continue the discussion, in case you've just joined us, it's International Day for People of African Descent, and our guests in studio are Mr. Nkrumah Lucia. He's a lecturer in history at St. Mary's College. He's been a lecturer in history for over a decade. Also with us is legislator Senator Alison Jean, a mother of Botham Jean, and both have shared with us their perspectives on the importance of recognizing people of African descent, and people of African descent recognizing their own importance, our own importance. We have to have that sense of pride and understanding who we are, and secondly, related to that, appreciating that we didn't decide how our hair would appear, and therefore the length or appearance of our hair should not have anything to do with preventing students from access to school or preventing people from access to job. Do we have Dr. Suma as yet? Not yet. Okay, so let us continue the discussion. Another aspect I wanted to ask from you, Senator Jean, you have quite often had to travel to the United States as a result of the ongoing case and the ongoing situation. But as with most of the other Black Lives Matter incidents, they have, if we can call it a silver lining, and you would not see it that way, having lost your son, but in terms of that so-called dark cloud and silver lining concept, a lot of the states where those murders have taken place have seen the legislators, whether it is at the council or at the local government level, taking actions. In the case of Botham, I seem to remember reading that something was done somewhere. I'm not too sure. What was it?
There is actually a Botham Jean Act, HB 929.
In what state?
In Texas. So there was a law created in Botham's name, the Bose Law, which now makes it an offense for a police officer to investigate or to be called or to appear at a crime scene without their body cam or their recording devices, because that was one of the things that came out of Botham's case at the trial. It was revealed that the woman deleted all her text messages right there on the scene. Photos were taken of her. And also the Dallas Police Association's chief ordered that the recording devices in the car be turned off. Also, that she herself, when she showed up at Bofam's door, did not have her body cam. So there is absolutely no camera footage of the confrontation that took place between herself and Bofam, if there was any. So that the law was created, it was passed in 2021, I believe, which now mandates that all police officers must have their recording devices on for as long as they are on that crime scene. So as
Is that Texas or nationally?
Texas, the whole of Texas. It's not just Dallas, but just Texas.
The entire state?
The entire state of Texas. I am aware that there was a George Floyd Act or bill, but up to now it has not yet been passed. So at least there was some move towards improving the system as a result of the deficiencies that we saw coming out of Bofam's case. I could tell you that I am advocating for other laws to be passed, because we're now in a situation where, on the civil side, there are laws in America that prevents the agencies associated with the one who has committed the murder. So, for example, in the case of Amber Geiger, she was a police officer. The fact that she was convicted of murder kind of scorns or prevents her employer, being the Dallas Police Department, and by extension the city of Dallas, from any liability. So she doesn't have a spoon to call her name, and so her employer, because
she's been convicted, she's paying for her crime.
She has paid for her crime, and therefore her employer does not need to pay. So we as a family remain with a lost son and nothing else. So I am seeking some sort of amendment to that law so that other families don't suffer that same fate. Because you're seeing over and over that police officers go and abuse their power. And in our case, she could have used so many alternative means to resolve what she thought was her apartment, and her own reaction to what happened could have been averted. But yet still, by using her cloak of power, she did what she did. And she was in uniform at the time. She used her service weapon, which came from her employer. She issued verbal commands, which was from the training that she got from her employer. So you're seeing,
and she was instructed to switch the instruments off
and everything. So you're seeing the direct connection between her employer and herself.
And what she did.
But they're saying she was off duty, when the standing orders for the police department says that you're on duty 24/7, because even though you are off duty, you are obligated to respond if you see a crime in progress. So here, where she thought that there was a crime in progress, which was a crime on her apartment, which she thought, because she said she thought he was a burglar in her apartment, she responded in the way that she would have to a burglar, and therefore she put back on her police duty. But these are some of the issues that we have. But just one last thing. I have 3 grandsons in America. And Bofam's situation makes me continuously nervous for my black sons in America. I visit them very often, and in June of this year when I visited, all 3 of them are rocking their braids. So they now, all of them braid their hair, cornrow their hair, kinky their hair, twist their hair, right? And that's how their hair is worn. Now, for me as a grandmother, I got an initial shock because of the way I was brought up. My socialization was that guys didn't plait their hair. And it's only, and at the back of our minds, when we saw a guy with his hair plaited or braided or locks, he was a kind of vagabond, kind of, cast aside. So I wouldn't want my grandsons to be viewed in that same way. But it's something that I had to come to grips with, right? This is what we are. This is who we are. And so we have to dispel all these preconceived notions of, and judging a book by its cover when we see young men coming towards us with their hair in different ways. So I think it's a new revolution that we need to really get to in order for us to embrace our Africanness.
Have we started seeing that among youth and students? Because as we can see, the frequency mainly affects youth and students than persons being turned away from a job because of their hair. Do you see, Nkrumah, in your exchange with youth and students, a greater level of appreciation of black hair and blackness like we used to in the case when Angela Davis made the afro popular at universities in America?
A lot of, and I mean even from my time, I wasn't in the time of Angela Davis, but even in my time at school, a lot of our notions of styling really came from celebrities. You know, it still has a popular hairstyle. I always tell my students, the one they call the Craig Mack. Many of them don't know where it came from, but it's a rapper who was called Craig Mack who had that hairstyle. So people are left to understand the diversity of black hair simply based on what celebrities do. So it does not allow them to understand a deeper cultural significance of it and wider implications of it than, hey, this looks cool. You know, so it in a way, because we have not dealt with that issue, it actually limits the range in which we can discuss the idea of grooming and ways of wearing African hair and these things. So that's why I'm saying, I mean, and I listen to say, in addition to, if we're talking about laws do have their place. But we know that even when there was no law that says, okay, you can't, you have to be light-skinned to be a teller in the bank, you know, in common practice, people would do so. You know, so laws are important, but there's a deeper discussion and education that has to take place, that we can have that understanding that when, that it would not be strange to see let's say a teller or whoever, or even the Prime Minister with cornrows, and it not be perceived as people like to say, a vein egg. You know, and we know the implications of that word itself. Life and death too. You know? So, and there's one last thing I want to say too. I mean, why that discussion is so very important. I think we often tend to speak about surviving, being black and surviving, but I mean, there should also be the ability to live in the fullest sense as Africans, and not just our physical bodies, but culturally, religiously, all of those things. So it should not just suffice that, hey, you are not being killed. That should not be the standard of, you know, whether you are living in a society comfortably. You should be able to express yourselves. When Rastafari developed, for instance, as a way of identifying with Africanness and these things, you personally would know the implications that people face. But our society so far is not receptive to the diversity of the various cultures that make us up, and therefore it really exposes people, especially black people, to a lot of abuse, and abuse that can sometimes be passed off as just being the norm. So we need to have these deeper discussions.
In addition to that, I think we also need to be careful that we don't seem subservient. Again, our blackness can make us feel subservient because of the white supremacy. So we give in. We're on the line and a white person comes in and we, yes, pass, go ahead, because we're second class to them. All of that is very, very important. And
it's still ingrained in too many of us.
We go to the hotels. We're seated there. We're paying the same for the same service. We're paying the same price
real problem
for the service. But yet still, we will accept the second place to whoever is there. I could recall once I was traveling, I was boarding a plane, and they called Group 1. My boarding pass said Group 1. So I'm on the line to go in with Group 1. And the airline clerk said to me, we're calling Group 1 in a kind of a...
What you doing there?
What you doing there? So I simply looked at her, looked at my boarding pass, and I continued on the line. And she came a second time and she said, ma'am, we're boarding Group 1. And I said to her, that's why I'm boarding. Can I see your boarding pass? And when I gave her the boarding pass, she's like, okay, sorry, ma'am. That is only because
you're black.
I'm black and I have no right to be in first class. Mm-hmm. That's a concept. Now, some of us would, cower. Oh, she said so. So even though I'm in Group 1, I'll still,
Mm-hmm.
No, I will not do that. If I am in the group that is supposed to be going, that's where I'm going. Mm-hmm. So we have to be careful about this kind of subservient kind of nature that we have been socialized to be. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Keep quiet, hush, That's how you shouldn't speak out. If a child spoke out, she was an affair. Mm-hmm. She was rude. She was, So our blackness is not only about the color of our skin, but the way we think.
The content of our character.
The content of our character.
Like Martin Luther King said.
Right. What our mind tells us. I think we have to be stronger as a people. We have to be more confident as a people. We have to know who we are and be proud of who we are. Mm-hmm. Whether it be beauty, whether it be brains, whether it be character, whatever it is, but we have to step ourselves much further to who we are today.
Two other questions before we move into the final section of today, where we'll be giving St. Lucians the opportunity to better understand everything we've said here, to see, feel, and be part of an activity that will reinforce the fact that we are people of African descent, and also reinforce the importance of black hair to people of African descent. And the two questions were, is there something like a Botham Jean Boulevard?
Oh, yes.
Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, well.
And at the same time, I've always often thought of it, maybe the writer in me. Your son's issue is the stuff movies are made of. We only have 5 minutes, but...
Okay, so actually, this is so opportune because the anniversary of Botham's death is going to be next week, September 6th. Mm-hmm. And Botham's sister wrote a book which is going to be released on September 5th. It's called After Botham. It's available on Amazon. And next week, I will be in Dallas with her, where she's going to be launching the book and having a book signing. On the street where he lived, which was called South Lamar, it has been renamed. It was renamed in 2021 as the Botham Jean Boulevard. So 6 miles of road downtown Dallas, you could pass on that street and Botham's name is etched. It's so coincidental that it's also the street on which the police department is housed. Mm-hmm. So the Dallas City Council made that decision to rename that street as Beaufort Boulevard. So we have the Beaufort law, we have the Beaufort Boulevard, we now have the book that my daughter
We'll be launching on the 5th.
will be launching on the 5th. I could tell you it's going to be difficult for me to read the book, but she has more courage than me to do it. We were about to start a book that would have morphed into a movie just before COVID came about in 2020. Actually, and sadly, excuse me, a gentleman who had started talking to us towards that journey died during COVID. He was found dead in his home. So that kind of put a little damper on it. But perhaps out of my daughter's book, there could be. There was also a documentary, a very good documentary, which we had at Caribbean Cinemas on Beaufort's death. In fact, there were either 2 or 3 documentaries on Beaufort's death. And every year for the last, it's going to be 5 years since Beaufort's death, every year, save for 2020, we have had a red tie gala, which takes place in Dallas at the end of the year, at the end of September, sorry. So his birthday is September 29th. So every year around that date, the last Saturday in September, we have a red tie gala. I could tell you this year, Earl, that we're bringing St. Lucia to Dallas because we're using it as an opportunity not only for fundraising for the Beaufort Foundation, but also to showcase St. Lucia. Because I will never forget who I am and where I'm from and where Beaufort came from. He was from St. Lucia. He told everybody that he met about St. Lucia. He wanted to be the Prime Minister of St. Lucia. He would call and say, Mommy, why doesn't the government do this, that? And he was very concerned about his St. Lucia. And he never had the intention of remaining in the United States. And so this year, we're going to have an exhibition of local products that are manufactured in St. Lucia. So together with Export St. Lucia, we will be bringing these products up. We're also going to be showcasing our very own entertainers. Afro Ale, who is our groovy soca monarch, will be at the gala, along with a young upcoming entertainer, Aldin Elmo Norville. We've also reached out to Julian Alfred and invited her to be our special guest. So hopefully, if she attends, that would be good. Again, showcasing our sports personalities. But more so, Julian Alfred is significant because she ran against Sha'Carri Richardson, who is a Dallas born and Dallas resident. So all of that we're doing in Beaufort's honor to carry out his legacy, and at the same time to use the funds generated from these activities to assist St. Lucia, to grow St. Lucia, reaching out to the Boys Training Center, the senior citizens' homes, homeless shelters, and providing support to his alma mater, St. Mary's College and Carmen Rennie Memorial, along with the Short Start Preschool.
And folks, in what is left of our program, we want to put up the promo for an activity that is going to be taking place on the 3rd of September, this coming Sunday, at Corinth, at the former Corinth estate. The Bellevue is the name of the place now, but
Bellevue.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about that Nkrumah, because the National Reparations Committee and the Cultural Development Foundation have been working with Events St. Lucia to get this going.
Good. So it's going to be the first of the first such event. I should say the first such event by the National Reparations Committee, because there have been other attempts to educate people about African hair and the issues around it, or you could say the matters around African hair. So it will be a showcase and an expo. We will have persons modeling African attire and hair. We will have a number of local producers of products and services that have to do with the care of African hair. And I've been seeing a number of them actually doing Instagram lives, teaching people about their hair and how to go about caring for it. And we know the range of products from oils to hair butters and these things that are being produced. So there will be some of them showcasing some of their products. We'll have some also performers, poets, singers who will be sharing. Food will also be available. It's a free event. Persons will attend for free. We'll have park and ride from Michel's Electrical. That's just to the back of Computer World. That will take you to the Belvedere Estate, which is where it will be hosted. As I said, it will be the first held by the National Reparations Committee, but we hope in coming years to repeat the event.
Tell us something about the venue.
The venue is actually the site
of its historicity.
The site of the current estate where the remains of the mill was located, and it has been refurbished and created into an environment where you have herbal gardens. There's a museum, a very good museum, which I think is an example that should inform other such sites, where information is provided to you about that estate, the history of the estates, the owners, the number of persons who were enslaved on those plantations, which is very important, that while we keep those structures, that it can be used to educate. So we're bringing together all of those things on that site around black hair matters to do with black hair, and the whole issue of reparations as well. And it gives people an opportunity to come in, learn about what is being done here by our producers of products and stuff like that. And African attire. There may also be some African food there as well. So we're asking persons to come out, come and enjoy it, come and be part of the discussion.
And folks, there you've had it, all in honor of observance today in St. Lucia, the Caribbean, and the wider world of the International Day for People of African Descent. We want to thank our two guests, Mr. Nkrumah Lucia, whom you've just heard from, and also Senator Alison Jean, who we are sure their contributions have assisted in bringing us to a better understanding of why our theme today is why a second decade and why black hair matters to people of African descent. I'm Earl Buski on behalf of everyone here at the National Television Network and on behalf of the Cultural Development Foundation, the National Reparations Committee, Events St. Lucia, Folk Research Center, and all the member entities of the Stakeholder Committee. We hope you've enjoyed today's discussion, and we look forward to your presence at the Belvedere Retreat this coming Sunday. Until then, enjoy the rest of International Day for People of African Descent.